Let's draw some Christmas flowers you could use as Christmas cards. Let's start sketching the poinsettia flower. You can start with a light pencil sketch using a hard graphite pencil, but I'm using erasable colored pencils just so you can hopefully see it a little better and I can still erase the mistakes later, which is the point of making a sketch anyway. Sketch out the rough shapes first. I see triangles in the photo, and then the placement and shapes of the leaves. Then you can draw the outlines of the leaves with a softer pencil like an HB and erase as much of the initial sketch as possible to make it look neat. At this point, I'm going to turn the reference photo black and white or grayscale to see the values easier. I'm using a hard pencil for kind of coloring in the red petals, which aren't actually petals. They're modified leaves called bracts. But in the grayscale photo, they look lighter gray, and then the actual green leaves are darker. So I'm using HB for coloring in the leaves below, but leaving the center leaf vein white. But either way, I'm dividing the leaf down the middle and coloring in each side separately. Now in the photo, the lightest areas are the little flowers or flower buds in the middle, and the darkest areas are the shading around them. So I'm using a softer pencil like 4B for shading in between those little flowers and the bracts in the center. Now in the bracts, the leaf veins are the darker part, so I'm using a softer pencil for drawing them out and adding some shading and wrinkles on them. In the actual leaves underneath, the leaf veins are lighter, so I'm using the eraser end of a mechanical pencil to carve them out. When you rest your hand on the drawing, you'll end up smudging the drawing, so you might want to put an extra piece of paper in between to prevent that, which I of course forgot to do and then had to erase a bunch of smudges from the background. The leaves didn't really look dark enough to me compared to the modified leaves above them, so I colored them some more with a softer pencil in between the white leaf veins. Let's add darker outlines and shading under the bracts and leaves to really make them pop, and I think it's starting to look like a poinsettia now. Let's do a Christmas rose this time. I'm using 3 stock photos from Pixabay as references. I recommend a hard pencil like an H for sketching, but I'm gonna use an erasable colored pencil just so you can see my sketch a bit better. The first flower is straight on. Let's start by drawing a circle for the middle, and Christmas roses have 5 petals, so let's draw a pentagon around the circle. So 5 angles for the petals. Or they're actually not petals, but we'll get to that later. And then let's start sketching the petals into these 5 corners. They're overlapping a bit, so some petals are in front of others. And let's do a hint of the stem. I'll sketch out the whole page first and then move on to the drawing. So the next flower is facing down. I'm doing a half circle and then adding 5 petals under it and marking the place in the middle and sketching the leaves on top curved forward a bit. And a bit of a stem again. Let's sketch one more flower, and this time an oval flower bud with leaves around it. And a few more leaves in general. Now let's go into the details. I'm using an H pencil. I told you the petals aren't actually petals. Anatomically, these tooth-looking things in the middle around the carpel are the actual petals of a Christmas rose or hellebore. The bigger ones that look like petals are sepals. They're leaves, but they aren't green. Kind of like with a poinsettia, the red parts that you would think are the flower petals are actually modified leaves. Not that important for the drawing, but just in case you're wondering why there's more stuff in the middle, because I was while drawing and I checked this out later. I'm defining the lines for the petals and the leaves. The leaves have a serrated or jagged edge, and then cleaning up by erasing the less precise initial sketch. The sepals have stripes or lines going through them, so let's draw some of those. More lines close to the center. I'm also adding shading, still with the same pencil, going through each of the sepals. I had a couple of flower painting and drawing books open that both had Christmas flowers included, so I list those below. For the leaves, I'll shade in one half of the leaf more, and I'll shade the stem darker just under the flower. Fix up a bit with the eraser on the end of a mechanical pencil, cause it's more precise. And now we are ready to do darker shading with a softer pencil. I used a 3B here. I'm going in and enforcing the lines near the center of the flower. It's partly cause the pattern is darker there, but also to make that part look deeper with the dark shading. I'm also doing little dots for the pattern, going around and doing the same thing for all of the sepals. And also shading in parts where the sepals overlap. Next I'm going in with a woodless graphite pencil, which is basically just an even darker pencil. You could use just a regular soft pencil and press harder, or even try a charcoal pencil for a few of the darkest details to add more contrast. I'm going around the tooth-like petals cause that's one of the darkest parts in the photo, and I'm drawing ovals for the anthers in the center that we left blank before, coloring in the petals light grey and the center black with the woodless pencil, since that's another darkest part in the photo. Then I'm trying to go in and carve out the white anthers with the mechanical pencil eraser and outlining them with the mechanical pencil, but it's kind of a mess. A bit more shading on the leaves and highlights with the eraser and outlining the sepals a bit more. Moving on to the flower bud, defining the outlines with the H pencil, erasing the initial sketch and shading in the sepals on the bud that are in the back. Doing the jagged edges on the leaves and shading them in. I'm giving the flower bud some shape by shading it even more. Darker shading with the 3B, and I'm using a paper stump to blend the shading to make it look smoother. This is totally optional, and you can also blend with a piece of paper towel if you want to achieve the same effect without using a paper stump. So I ruined my kneaded eraser by using it on charcoal before, and I was trying to clean it in a recent video, but I finally bought a new one. And I think I've forgotten how to use it, or this one's just really soft, because I tried molding it into a sharp tip to erase fine highlights into the leaves, and the kneaded eraser just wasn't keeping the shape and I gave up on it. Let's do the remaining leaves, outline, jagged edges, the leaf veins. I remember how talking about leaf veins used to get my videos demonetized back in the day, but I think that's gotten fixed by now. A bit of shading and blending. On to the last flower. Outlining the sepals and erasing to clean up the outline. Some of the sepals have a really sharp tip, and in others it's curved inward so it looks rounder. Now you're getting the center of the flower from a different angle. The outer part should be the tooth-like petals, but it looks like I left them out of this one. So there are just the filaments and anthers, and then inside them the style and stigma coming out of the carpel. Moving on to shading the stem and the inside of the sepals. Adding some of the lines for patterns. The darkest parts in the photo are in the center of the flower again, so adding the darkest shading there with the woodless graphite pencil. It's a tricky angle. The two sepals on top are looking kind of chubby, and shading the part between those two sepals very dark made it worse. It emphasizes how the sepals are overlapping and it's looking a bit strange. I'll try fixing it a bit and add a photo of the final drawing here. This time we're drawing an amaryllis. Let's start with the drawing. Again, I used both the Flower Painter's Essential Handbook by Jill Bass as help and a real amaryllis as live reference. I made a quick practice sketch with colored pencils before starting the more detailed drawing. The colored sketch was also a plan for a colored watercolor version of this drawing, which I also filmed for an upcoming video. I started with a light pencil sketch using a hard H pencil. This way it's easier to get rid of any mistakes in the initial sketch later. I sketched out a flower bud and a flower that's already opened, so that both of those stages of the flowering are present in the drawing, and so that the silhouette is a bit more interesting. And I sketched out some of the thick stem and leaves, but no flower bulb this time. I like how the shape of the flower bud turned out, but I'm not as happy with the open flower. Honestly though, the Amaryllis I used as a reference didn't look that great either. Maybe the petals just hadn't spread out quite enough yet. I darkened the sketch with a mechanical pencil once it was done, and then went on to shade the left side of the sketch lightly with a hard pencil. I use a piece of scrap paper under my palm so that the rest of the sketch won't get smudged from the oils on my hand. I added darker shading with a softer 3B pencil in the crevices of the flower bud and stripes to the stem and the leaves around the flower bud and around the stem. I continued with the same process towards the right, so I'm not smudging parts I've already shaded as I go along. If you're left-handed, start from the right and work your way to the left. This drawing and all the other Christmas flower drawings are already in my Redbubble shop, so if you want to have a sneak peek, you can go have a look. There's also a repeat pattern of the Amaryllis, although I think I'll alter it a bit for the repeat pattern tutorial video to show you how you can make it not look like it's just the same image repeated over and over again, even if the pattern is made up of just one image. I also defined the outlines a bit with a mechanical pencil. I cleaned up any smudges from the white background and added some highlights with a kneaded eraser. I added some shading on the flower petals to make them look a bit wrinkled, since they were looking really stiff. I did the darkest shading with a woodless graphite pencil to add contrast. It just appears a lot more black than any of the normal soft pencils I have. And you can do a great job with proportions and shading, but without the darkest parts it often looks like there's something missing, so I try to have a bit of pure white and a bit of black in all drawings to have a wider range of shades. Today I'll show you how I draw a hyacinth. I started by making a quick practice sketch with colored pencils first, and I used the flower watercolor painting book as help and also had a real-life hyacinth reference. I started the pencil drawing with a light pencil sketch using a hard pencil, maybe an H or an HB. I roughly sketched out the outlines of the round bulb and the leaves and the bloom. I know the initial sketch is hard to see since I'm using the light pencil, but hopefully it gets better soon. I tried to adjust the levels on the video so that it's easier to see, although it does make the colors less bright and saturated. I didn't just want to draw the bloom and the leaves, I wanted to make this more of a botanical drawing, like the daffodil one I made a while ago, so I drew the whole plant, including the bulb and the roots. After the rough shapes, I moved on to the shapes of the individual flower petals. This is the tedious part of drawing hyacinths, unless you go with a more abstract approach and just don't draw all the flowers individually. Then I used a kneaded eraser to erase the rough shapes that I didn't need anymore. This is why I sketch lightly in the beginning. It's easier to get rid of the initial guidelines if they're light to begin with. And using a kneaded eraser helps since it doesn't produce eraser dust that you then have to wipe off and potentially smudge your sketch. And then it was time to refine the sketch, make it a bit darker with a softer pencil or just by pressing harder with the same pencil. Hyacinth, of course, isn't just a Christmas flower, it's also a spring flower, but they haven't worked for me in the garden. I don't know why, but the flower bulbs just haven't survived the winter. I also tried making hyacinths from a previous year flower again the next Christmas, but the flowers were really underwhelming the second time. If you prefer the real-time ASMR versions with the drawing sounds and no talking, you'll find those on my ASMR channel soon. Then it's time to add light shading all over, still with a hard pencil. I added some stripes on the leaves and shaded the flower petals near the center of the flower and at the tip of the petal to make them look curved. This drawing actually took quite long for such a small and simple sketch on an A5 size sketchbook based on the amount of footage I have. I cut and sped this up from about 55 minutes of footage. I used a softer 3B pencil for darker shading. What's your favorite Christmas flower, by the way? I blended the shading with a stump, but you could also use tissue paper as well, or you can even make a paper stump yourself. I then used a woodless graphite pencil for the darkest shading, since it's darker than any of the normal pencils I have. I'm also listing the art supplies I used below, as always, if you're interested in any of them. I uploaded this and the other Christmas flowers to my Redbubble shop, so they're available as Christmas greeting cards, stickers for Christmas crafting, and patterns on home decor items, and so on. I added some roots to the flower bulb with the kneaded eraser. You can form a sharp tip to erase thin lines, or you can also use the eraser of a mechanical pencil, especially if it still has sharp edges. But if you want to paint Christmas cards and decor, watch this video next. See you there. Hellebore, 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 hellebore.